Jonathan Petramala is a weather reporter for Accu Weather in Chicago, where it took just 5 minutes outside for his pants to freeze solid during his broadcast earlier today. He told me via Skype it is so cold his eyes hurt.
This morning it was in the 50 below zero range. Areas were even colder than that. The actual temperature, you're talking about 23, 24 degrees below zero in Chicagoland area. So very, very chilly. This was the second coldest day in recorded history in Chicago, and records have been kept for 150 years. So a very record-breaking day.
You're talking Fahrenheit, aren't you, Jonathan?
Yeah, Fahrenheit.
Yeah, exactly. Your money. What's it like when you go outside? What do those temperatures feel like?
It feels like death, and that's been a concern, especially with officials here in Chicago. You have thousands of homeless, advocates would argue tens of thousands of homeless that are sleeping on the streets. And so the city really went into a mode of a crisis mode, basically. The best way I could compare it would be like a government agency comparing for a hurricane here in the United States, where they opened up shelters that weren't open before. They added bed space. They also sent out buses as emergency heating shelters just to try and get as many folks as they can off the streets into someplace warm. Unfortunately, though, we were driving around the city and you still saw people sleeping on the sidewalk. So it was very difficult to see that, especially when you felt your face, any exposed skin right away. It was hurting. I mean, right away. And when you think about conditions like that, when you have the Accu weather real feel of over 50 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, that's maybe 5 minutes before frostbite happens. So it's a very serious situation.
So how are you reporting in that? Do you cover up totally? Is your face covered up? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm totally covered. I have a face mask. I have about 3 or 4 layers head to toe. And I also wear goggles because at that temperature, your eyes hurt too, especially here. It's the Windy City. That's the nickname of Chicago. That's what's adding to those dramatic temperatures. And so that wind's whipping right in your eyes. So I made sure I had absolutely no skin exposed, because if you did, I mean, right away, you could feel your skin start to hurt, and that's the first sign of frostbite.
And what about if you get damp? Because you did, wow, you had an impromptu experiment involving a pair of your pants, didn't you, Jonathan? So explain to us. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm a storyteller, and it's kind of a hard story to visualize cold. You can't see cold, it's air. But I wanted to be able to show what's the effects of this temperature. What does it mean to be this cold? And so I mean, it was really easy. All I did was I poured some water on some old pants that I wore earlier this week, and I set them outside, and literally it was minutes, just under 10 minutes, probably a little more like 5 minutes, and they stood up straight. So that kind of shows you, as rigid as a board, just how quickly it took just to freeze. And it was really kind of a fun experiment to kind of show how quickly that happens and the importance of limiting your exposure.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to get damp for real and be outside.
No, not at all. And I've actually done a polar plunge in Minnesota at the New Year's Day, where it was 14 below Fahrenheit. And I can tell you, jumping into a lake that cold, surrounded by a foot of ice, you know, in the lake, it's a serious situation. I'd never been in something like that. It's like somebody's punching you in the gut and you just can't breathe. So you can't imagine how dangerous it would be if you were to fall through ice on one of these lakes.
You said in your travels there are some people, homeless people, unfortunately, who are still being forced to sleep outside. But what about the rest of the city? Is it kind of, well, is it empty? Has it virtually closed down?
It's a ghost town. Actually, for me personally, it was fantastic, because driving around the city, typically, like any major city, of course, you're going to have traffic. Chicago's known for its traffic, and it was easy. Anywhere you went around the city, you hardly saw traffic. A lot of businesses are closed. People are just staying home. People are talking to you leading up to this. Longtime Chicagoans, folks that are, you know, in the upper Midwest, they're a hardy bunch. They weren't going to mess around with this. A lot of people just stayed home. They worked from home. Like I said, restaurants were closed. The restaurant here in my hotel is actually closed. So it's tough to find food. But yeah, it was a ghost town. No tourists walking around. Millennium Park, it has that famous reflective beam there. Nobody was there taking photos. It was, I guess, too dangerous for selfies even.
So tell me, how long are you going to have to put up with this for?
One more morning of these really, really frigid, record-breaking temperatures. I'll be waking up dark and early, covering that as well. And then fortunately by the weekend here in Chicago, it's going to warm up to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So you think about that, that's going to be around a 100-degree swing So that's also going to be a record, just how quickly the temperature is changing back up to above average temperatures, like it is below average temperatures right now.
And I suppose that creates problems of its own where there's places that have got deep snow if there's going to be such a huge temperature swing.
You got to be worried about some of these rivers and ice flows and the blockages. You know, if you have a swift melting, of course, then you're going to have some possible flash flood situations as well. So that's something we're going to be monitoring next week.
Weather reporter Jonathan Petramala speaking to us from Chicago, where some locals have dubbed the city today Siberia. And if you're wondering, that real feel temperature that he was talking about, -50 Fahrenheit, he said, that's -45 Celsius. The actual temperature, -23, well, that's -30 degrees Celsius in our language. And if you get a chance, check out that interview online. There's some great pictures there and you can see the frozen pants that he's talking about.